I used to think the hardest part of my 20s would be figuring out a career, maybe paying rent on time or dealing with student loans. Nobody warns you that sometimes the hardest part is learning how to walk away from people you thought you couldn't live without. Back in March of 2014, I packed up my life in Milwaukee into the trunk of a silver Honda Civic that rattled every time it went over 40. I had 2 battered suitcases, a guitar I hadn't played in months, and a stack of sketchbooks stuffed with half-finished watercolors. I told myself I was driving toward a clean slate, though in truth I was running, from my parents' crumbling marriage, from an ex who left more bruises on my spirit than my skin, and from the version of myself that kept shrinking to fit into other people's expectations. The drive to Portland, Maine took me nearly 2 days. I remember pulling into the city late on a Sunday afternoon, the Atlantic air colder and sharper than the Midwest wind I was used to. The sun was setting behind rows of old brick buildings, and the streets smelled faintly of salt and coffee. I found the attic apartment I'd rented on Congress Street. It was small, barely enough room for a bed and a folding table I used as a desk, but it had a slanted window that looked out over the harbor. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first weeks felt like freedom disguised as routine. In the mornings, I'd take my sketchbook down to a little cafe on the corner, order a cheap black coffee, and sketch the fishermen unloading crates or the tourists wandering by with cameras. At night, I worked shifts at a seafood diner by the water. The work was exhausting, running plates of fried clams to tables of families on vacation. But I liked the noise. It reminded me that life could be messy and loud without being dangerous. I had promised myself I'd keep things simple. No dating, no letting anyone too close, no more men who made me feel small. I even wrote it down on a sticky note and taped it above my desk. No more men who make me smaller. Then I met Julian. He was sitting outside the cafe one morning in April, strumming his guitar like he had all the time in the world. His case sat open at his feet with a handful of coins inside. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded your attention, but people couldn't help slowing down as they passed. Something about the way his fingers moved over the strings made you feel like the song was just for you. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked me, nodding toward the chair across from mine. I glanced at my sketchbook, then back at him. His dark hair was a little too long, falling into his eyes, and he had a smile that came easy. I shrugged. "It's a free table." He slid into the chair with a kind of ease I envied. "Drawing. What do you sketch?" "I've seen you here before," he said. "Always, whatever doesn't move too fast," I said, closing the cover of my book. "Mostly people." "People, huh?" His grin widened. "Think you could capture me?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Maybe. But you'd have to hold still, and I doubt you're good at that." That was the beginning. We talked until my coffee went cold about music and art and how Portland felt like a town built for second chances. He told me he was 29, originally from Boston, and made a living playing gigs at local bars. When I got up to leave for my shift, he stood too, slinging his guitar over his shoulder. "See you around, Clara," he said, like he already knew we would. And of course we did. Every morning after that, Julian seemed to be at the cafe, waving me over like we were old friends. At first it felt like fate, like maybe moving halfway across the country hadn't been running away, but running toward something new. Back then, I didn't see the shadows. I only saw the sunlight streaming through his smile. Julian had a way of making the world feel smaller in the beginning, but in a good way. My mornings weren't just mine anymore. They were ours. We'd sit together on the patio outside the cafe, me with my sketchbook, him with his guitar, trading stories about the people who passed by. He'd nudge me, pointing at a couple bickering on the sidewalk. "Bet they're arguing about dinner," he'd whisper. I'd grin, adding quickly to my sketch. Or maybe he forgot their anniversary. It felt easy. He listened in a way few people ever had. He asked about my art, my family, even about the breakup I still carried like an invisible bruise. When I told him I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about it, he didn't press. Instead, he strummed a slow tune and said, "Then we'll just sit with the silence." It was hard not to be drawn to that kind of gentleness. By early summer, we were seeing each other nearly every day. He'd show up at the diner just as my shift ended, leaning against the lamppost with that lazy smile, strumming a tune under the streetlight. My co-workers teased me about the mystery musician boyfriend, and I'd blush telling them it wasn't that serious. But it was. One night, after we walked along the pier, Julian brushed a strand of hair behind my ear and said, "You know, you're the only person I feel like I can really breathe around." The words cracked something open inside me. I'd been carrying so much guilt and shame from my past that hearing someone say I mattered, that I was different, felt like a balm. But small signs started slipping through, and I ignored them at first. One evening after my shift, I found him outside, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Enough," he said lightly, though his eyes darted toward the door. "Took you long." "I had to close out," I explained, tugging my bag higher on my shoulder. "Sure, but I saw one of those drunk guys talking to you. What did he want?" "Nothing. He was asking about the menu. He's harmless." Julian nodded, but his jaw tightened. "Boundaries." "Just making sure. Guys like that don't respect." I brushed it off. Maybe he was just being protective. Maybe after what I'd been through before, I secretly liked the idea of someone caring that much. By July, he'd started showing up at my apartment more often, sometimes unannounced. He'd bring groceries or flowers, saying he wanted to take care of me. It was sweet, until it wasn't. One night I was FaceTiming my younger sister Emily. We were laughing about something dumb from childhood when Julian walked in. He sat down next to me, arms folded. After I hung up, he said quietly, "Why do you waste so much energy on her? She never supported you." "She's my sister," and I said, "I don't need her to agree with everything I do." He shrugged but kept staring at me. "People like her hold you back." I told myself he didn't mean it, that maybe he was just tired. But the next time Emily called, I hesitated to pick up, hearing his words in my head. That was the start of it. Little by little, my world revolved around him. And at the time, I thought that was what love was supposed to look like. Autumn rolled into Portland with brisk winds and orange leaves scattered across the cobblestones. My art had taken a back seat by then. Most of my sketchbooks sat unopened, gathering dust in a corner of the apartment. Julian insisted we spend more time together, and whenever I tried to pull out my paints, he'd say, "You're wasting your talent on scribbles. Why not paint me something that matters?" I'd laugh it off, but I stopped trying after a while. The first real crack appeared one morning when my landlord, Mr. Peterson, knocked on the door about a leaky pipe. I answered, hair messy, still in my pajamas. We talked briefly in the hallway, nothing serious. That's when Julian appeared, stepping between us so quickly I almost stumbled back. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. "Just reminding her about the plumbing," Mr. Peterson said, raising his eyebrows. Julian's hand found my wrist, gripping it just a little too tightly as he leaned down and whispered, "Why are you smiling at him like that?" I froze. My landlord looked at me, confused, then nodded politely and left. When the door shut, I pulled my arm back. "Julian, what the hell?" "I don't like the way he looks at you," he said, voice low. He wasn't looking at me. He was talking about pipes. Julian's expression softened instantly. "Hey, I'm sorry, I love you too much to lose you." He kissed my forehead, and for some reason, the apology felt heavier than the accusation. That's how it went. Every time he crossed a line, he followed it with tenderness, like a bandage on a wound he created. And I kept convincing myself the bandage was enough. By winter, I'd quit my job at the diner. Julian insisted he could cover the bills with his gigs. "Exhaust yourself serving people who don't matter," he'd said. "Focus on us. On me." Why I tried selling sketches online in secret just to keep a piece of myself alive. But even that felt risky. He had a way of picking up my phone, scrolling through it under the pretense of keeping distractions away. One night he deleted a contact without telling me. "Who was that?" I asked when I noticed. "Doesn't matter," he said calmly. "Someone you don't need." And just like that, my circle grew smaller. Friends drifted away when I stopped returning calls. Emily texted less often. My paints dried up in their jars. The scariest part wasn't how much I lost. It was how natural it started to feel. December 2015 arrived with snow blanketing the streets and a tension in the air I couldn't shake. One afternoon I received an email from a gallery I'd applied to months earlier. They'd accepted one of my watercolors for their New Year's Eve exhibition. For the first time in over a year, I felt something spark inside me. When I told Julian, he smiled too wide. Galleries can be brutal. That's great, babe. But are you sure you're ready? I just want to try, I said firmly. The night of the exhibition, I dressed carefully, slipping on a dress I hadn't worn since before I met him. My hands shook as I buttoned it. This felt like more than an art show. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But when I arrived, Julian was waiting outside, gripping my old sketchbook in his hand. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He leaned in close, his voice a sharp whisper. "You'd embarrass yourself without me. You need me." I felt the world tilt, his words sinking like stones into my chest. People passed us glancing curiously, but no one stopped. For the first time, I didn't argue. I just stepped back, walked inside, and turned off my phone. That night, I slept on a friend's couch, trembling but resolute. I knew something had broken beyond repair. The aftermath wasn't clean. Julian flooded my inbox with apologies, with recordings of songs he wrote just for me. Then the sweetness turned to bitterness. "If you leave me, you'll regret it." With help from my gallery friend, I filed for a restraining order. The police said they couldn't do much unless he broke it. For weeks, I flinched at shadows outside my window, convinced I saw his figure under the streetlight. In time, I moved again, this time to Boston. I taught art to kids in a community center, rediscovering the joy of painting through their laughter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. Even now, years later, whenever I pass a street musician strumming a guitar, my chest tightens. I remember how warmth can disguise itself as chains. Love should never cost you your freedom. The most dangerous influences don't always begin with cruelty. They begin with kindness, with someone who makes you feel chosen, only to slowly close the walls around you. Real love gives you room to grow, not reasons to shrink. I used to think I understood what independence meant. Growing up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I spent most of my teenage years watching the same mountains roll past the car windows, the same quiet streets where everyone knew each other's business. My mom raised me and my younger brother alone after Dad left when I was 9. She worked double shifts as a nurse, and I picked up a camera for the first time when I was 12, one my grandfather had left me when he passed away. Photography became my way of seeing the world differently, catching the light falling through trees, or the expression on someone's face when they didn't know they were being seen. By the time I turned 18, I was restless. Chattanooga felt too small, too predictable. I wanted something bigger, a place where people didn't already know who I was or what I'd been through. That's why I chose Northbridge University in Boston. It wasn't just about school. It was about escape, about testing whether I could really stand on my own. Before I left, my mom hugged me so tightly I thought I'd lose my breath. "Maya," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "promise me you'll stay focused. No distractions." I promised, and I meant it. But promises have a way of unraveling in the noise of a new life. The first weeks in Boston felt like stepping into another universe. The streets were alive in a way Chattanooga never was. Horns honking, people rushing past with coffee cups, languages I'd never heard back home. My dorm room was cramped, shared with a girl named Jenna, who painted abstract canvases late into the night. I tried to carve out space for myself by hanging my photos on the walls, but still, I felt like a small fish thrown into an ocean. I wanted to belong. That's what led me to the rooftop party one sticky night in late August. The view stretched across the city, lights glittering like stars dropped onto the streets below. Music pulsed through portable speakers, people laughing, shouting over one another. I kept my camera slung over my shoulder, more like a shield than an accessory. That's when Ethan found me. He walked right up as if we'd known each other for years. "Look mysterious?" he asked, nodding toward my camera. "You a photographer or just trying to?" I smiled nervously. "A little of both, maybe." "I'm Ethan," he said, holding out his hand with the confidence of someone who expected the world to take it. He was 20, a junior, and within 10 minutes he'd introduced me to half the crowd on that rooftop. He had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even with 20 other conversations happening around you. That night, I walked back to my dorm thinking maybe Boston wouldn't feel so lonely after all. Ethan's charm didn't take long to weave into my daily routine. He'd text me every morning before my alarm went off. "Good luck in class today, beautiful." He started waiting outside my lectures, walking me across campus like it was his responsibility. When I stayed late at the library, he'd show up with coffee, sliding it across the table with a grin. At first, I told myself it was what every girl wanted, someone who cared enough to be there, someone who noticed the details. But by October, the attention started feeling heavier than I expected. One night, I was working on a photo assignment in the dorm lounge when my phone buzzed. "Ethan, why aren't you answering?" I had 3 missed calls already. I texted back, "Just working." His reply came instantly, "Who are you with?" When I didn't respond within 5 minutes, the calls started again. By the time I got back to my room, Ethan was waiting outside the building. "Why didn't you pick up?" he demanded. "I told you, I was working." "With who?" His eyes narrowed, and I realized this wasn't about worry. This was about control. I brushed it off, telling myself he just cared too much. But the questions kept coming, and the more I explained, the less he believed me. The isolation crept in slowly, almost invisibly. My roommate invited me to an art gallery in the city one weekend, and I said yes. But when Ethan heard, he frowned. "You'd rather hang out with her than with me?" "It's just an art show," I said. "I don't like the way she looks at me," he muttered. "Stay here with me." I canceled. It was easier than fighting. On Instagram, I posted a group photo from a dorm movie night. Ethan messaged me minutes later. "Why is that guy standing so close to you?" I started second-guessing every post, every outing, until eventually I stopped going altogether. My world shrank to the size of Ethan's approval. The worst night came in November. A few friends gathered in the dorm to play truth or dare, harmless fun, just laughter and teasing. When it was Ethan's turn, he dared me to kiss another student on the cheek. Everyone laughed, expecting me to brush it off, but I leaned forward nervously and gave the quickest peck imaginable. The room cheered. Ethan didn't. He dragged me into my room, slammed the door, and his voice shook with rage. Me in front of them. "You humiliated," I tried to explain, but he shoved me onto the bed and pulled a pocket knife from his jeans. He didn't press it against me. He didn't have to. The glint of the blade under the dim light was enough. "Never disrespect me again," he whispered. My body froze, fear spreading like ice through my veins. A knock on the door broke the silence. "Maya? You okay?" It was Talia, one of the girls from the gathering. I managed to push the door open just enough for her to see inside. Her eyes widened when she spotted the knife, and without hesitation she yanked me out, slamming the door shut behind us. Campus security was called. Ethan disappeared into the night before they arrived. I wish I could say I pressed charges right then, that I stood tall and refused to let fear swallow me. But fear has a way of silencing you. I told the police I didn't want to move forward, terrified of retaliation, terrified of being labeled dramatic or unstable. Instead, I requested a dorm transfer, deleted my social media, and tried to disappear. Ethan didn't let go easily. He spread rumors through mutual friends, saying I was unstable, overreacting, that I made the whole thing up. Whispers followed me down hallways, and even when people smiled at me, I wondered what they'd heard. By spring semester, I found refuge in the photography club. The dark room became a sanctuary, the smell of chemicals oddly comforting as my images developed slowly in trays of liquid. I showcased my work in a small campus exhibit, standing in the back of the room, trying not to shake. For a moment, I felt seen for something other than my scars. Still, the scars were there. I jumped at raised voices. I hesitated when new classmates wanted to get close, and late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I scrolled through the untouched folder of photos from that year. Among them was one from that rooftop party, the night I met Ethan. His smile glowed under string lights. Mine was shy but wide, and together we looked like the start of something beautiful. Now, whenever I see that picture, I remember the truth. Sometimes the brightest smiles hide the darkest intentions. Love and care should never come with fear attached. What feels like protection can be control in disguise, and what feels flattering at first can turn into a cage. Real love doesn't silence you, isolate you, or make you question your worth. Real love gives you space to grow, not reasons to shrink. I used to believe that starting over meant you could leave everything behind. The heartbreak, the regrets, the mess you made of things. At 25, after a breakup that had me questioning whether I even knew myself anymore, I packed up what little I owned and left Leeds for Sheffield. I told myself a new city would be the clean slate I needed, that the past wouldn't follow me there. The breakup had been ugly, the kind that strips away more than love. It takes your confidence, your plans, your sense of direction. I'd been with Ella for nearly 5 years. We met young, and in my head, that meant forever. When it ended, it felt like someone had ripped up the map I'd been living by. I was working part-time at a print shop, barely scraping rent, telling people I was saving for a photography course I might never afford. Most nights I just sat in my room scrolling through old pictures, wondering where I went wrong. That's when I saw the ad. Division Street, city center, decent rent, 2 bedrooms. I couldn't afford a place on my own, so the idea of splitting costs with a stranger didn't seem so bad. The man who answered the door that first day was Lucas Price. He was 27, a little older than me, with neat hair, pressed shirts, and a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked me through the flat like he was giving a tour of a museum, pointing out house rules in a clipped voice. Shoes off at the door, kitchen clean by 9, bathroom use scheduled in the mornings. I told myself he was just organized. After Ella, I figured a little order might be good for me. I signed the lease that week. At first, living with Lucas wasn't unbearable. He kept to himself most of the time, cooked bland meals in silence, and retreated to his room by 10. But there was something about his presence that felt heavy. He rarely looked me in the eye, and when he did, it was brief, like he was cataloging something. When he spoke, it was short, precise sentences. You left the kettle handle wet again. The trash goes out on Thursdays. It wasn't rude exactly, just cold, like I was more an intruder than a flatmate. I brushed it off. I'd been through worse. A quiet roommate was still better than endless arguments and slammed doors. At least that's what I thought. By October, the little things started nagging at me. I'd come home from work and notice my bedroom door slightly open, even though I always locked it. My camera tripod would be leaning against the wall, though I hadn't touched it in weeks. A photo of me and my sister, one of the few personal things I'd unpacked, was shifted off center on the dresser. One evening over takeout, I tried to bring it up casually. Weird question, but have you been in my room? Lucas didn't look up from his noodles. Why would I go in your room? It just seemed like stuff's been moved around. He smiled faintly, like I'd said something amusing. Maybe you're just forgetful. The way he said it, calm, almost patronizing, made me doubt myself for a second. I told myself it was stress, that maybe I wasn't locking the door as carefully as I thought. But the feeling of being watched never left me. When Sophie came into my life, that feeling got sharper. I met her at the print shop. She was a regular, always bringing in rolls of film from an old point-and-shoot camera. She laughed easily, asked me about my photos, and before long we were grabbing coffee after work. The first time she came over, Lucas was sitting in the living room with a book open on his lap. He didn't look up when we walked in, but every few seconds I caught his eyes flicking toward us. Later, as Sophie and I were leaving, she leaned close and whispered, "Chills. It's like he's memorizing us." "Your roommate gives me?" I laughed it off, embarrassed. "He's just socially awkward." But I felt it too. By November, the weight of his presence was grinding me down. If I stayed out late, Lucas would text me, "Where are you? Do you know what time it is?" Like he was my father. If I mentioned applying for a photography course, he'd scoff. "Waste of money. You'll end up failing like the rest." At first I tried to shake it off, but the words sank in deeper than I wanted to admit. It was easier to stop applying, to stop talking about dreams that felt fragile. The night that changed everything started around 2 a.m. I woke to the sound of floorboards creaking. My heart thumped in my chest as I stared at the dark ceiling. Through the crack under my bedroom door, I saw the faint shadow of movement. The doorknob rattled once, slowly, then again. Adrenaline shot through me. I grabbed a heavy book from the nightstand and yanked the door open. Lucas stood there, blank-faced, as if he'd just been caught wandering. "I thought I heard something," he said flatly, then turned and walked back to his room. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I started planning my exit after that. I scrolled through rental ads on my phone at work, made excuses to stay at Sophie's. When I finally told Lucas I was moving, something in his face shifted. For the first time since I'd known him, the mask cracked. "People always leave," he muttered, staring at my half-packed boxes. "You'll regret this." The way he said it made my stomach turn. On my final night, as I double-checked my luggage, I realized my SD card was missing, the one with months of photos. Panic set in. While Lucas was out, I slipped into his room. Everything was painfully neat until I found a small box under the bed. Inside were dozens of photos, not landscapes, not strangers. Me. Sleeping, brushing my teeth, eating breakfast. Sophie, too. Pictures of her outside the shop, walking home, captured without her knowing. My hands shook as I shoved the box back. I didn't take the card. I just grabbed my bag and left for Sophie's, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I returned with 2 friends to collect the rest of my things. Lucas stood in the doorway, smiling faintly, like nothing had happened. "You'll miss how safe it was here," he said. I didn't reply. I didn't even look back. Later, I learned I wasn't the first. A former tenant messaged me after I posted online about looking for a new place. "Lucas?" she wrote. "I lasted 3 months, same stuff, always watching, always around." No one had ever pressed charges. There was never enough proof, never enough to pin him down. But I didn't need a court record to know what he was. Years later, I still lock my doors twice, sometimes 3 times. I keep my blinds shut at night. I tell myself I'm cautious now, not paranoid. But sometimes I wonder if there's a difference. What I know for sure is this: bad influences don't always arrive as obvious threats. Sometimes they come as the quiet roommate, the colleague, the friend of a friend. And by the time you notice what they really are, they've already been watching too long. Not every bad influence announces itself loudly. Sometimes it's the quiet, subtle erosion of your boundaries, the roommate who makes you doubt your memory, the friend who chips away at your confidence, the partner who cloaks control in concern. The lesson I learned is simple but sharp. Trust the discomfort you feel. It's there to protect you. Boundaries are not selfish, they're survival. It's strange, the things you remember when you're older and looking back. For me, it isn't the big moments that stand out from that summer of 2012. It's small, ordinary details, the sound of cicadas rattling in the Georgia heat, the way the golden retriever's nails clicked across polished hardwood floors, or how the air inside that house always smelled faintly of peppermint toothpaste. I was 23 then, freshly graduated, unmoored, and in no mood to return to my parents' house in North Carolina, where they were busy tearing each other apart after 25 years of marriage. I thought a house-sitting job would give me a breather. A few weeks of quiet, time to sketch, time to figure out what came next. The ad came through a friend of a friend connection. A dentist named Dr. Thomas Whitaker needed someone to watch his home in Savannah while he traveled through Europe. He offered generous pay, more than I'd ever been offered for any part-time gig. There was a dog to look after, some plants to water, and not much else. When I first stepped inside his house, I felt small. The ceilings stretched tall, the floors gleamed, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a magazine. There were framed diplomas on the wall, certificates with golden seals, and bookcases crammed with journals and hardcovers. And then there was Charlie, the golden retriever. He was older, with a little white around his muzzle, but he greeted me with such warmth that I instantly felt less like an intruder and more like a guest. The first week went as smoothly as I could have hoped. I walked Charlie every morning along the quiet streets shaded by moss-draped oaks. I ate simple meals, read on the porch, and sometimes sat at the kitchen table sketching in my notebook. For a while, I almost convinced myself that I could stay like that forever. The silence felt healing, a kind of salve for the chaos I'd left behind. But silence, I would soon learn, has its own way of turning sinister. The trouble started in the second week. It was a sticky afternoon, the kind where sweat clung to your back no matter how still you sat. I was in the living room flipping through one of the heavy medical journals Thomas had left out when the doorbell rang. Charlie barked and bounded to the front door. I opened it cautiously, and there she was, a woman, maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back too tightly and eyes that darted in quick, restless movements. "Is Thomas here?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, carrying an edge that made my stomach tighten. "He's away," I explained. "I'm just house-sitting." She tilted her head and studied me like I'd just fed her a ridiculous lie. "No," she said flatly. "You're covering for him. He's here. Tell him Angela's not going anywhere." Before I could respond, Charlie growled, a low rumble deep in his chest. She flinched, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off. I closed the door quickly, heart racing. At first, I chalked it up to a bitter ex or maybe a pushy patient. Dentists probably saw their share of odd characters. But the unease stuck with me. That night, I replayed the conversation in my head until the sound of Charlie's steady breathing finally lulled me to sleep. The next day it happened again. A knock at noon. Angela demanding to see Thomas. Her voice less angry, more desperate. I told her again that he was gone, but she didn't believe me. This time she leaned in close to the glass and hissed, "You're lying, don't cover for him." When she finally left, I locked the door, slid the chain, and stood in the hallway for a long time, palms clammy. I considered calling Thomas, but the idea felt silly. He was halfway across the world. Besides, maybe Angela would get tired of showing up. But she didn't. The phone calls began a few days later. At first, just once a day, my cell ringing with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, silence. When I didn't, static filled the voicemail box. I tried to ignore it, but my nerves grew tighter with every buzz of my phone. Then, one evening, I stepped outside to water the flowers and noticed the back gate swinging open. I always latched it, always. The latch wasn't broken, but it hung loose as though someone had deliberately opened it. Charlie barked furiously until I pulled him back inside. That night, I finally emailed Thomas. I explained everything, the woman at the door, the calls, the open gate. His reply came hours later, short and dismissive. "Angela is unstable, but harmless. Don't worry. If it makes you feel better, I'll double your pay if you stick it out." The money was tempting. I didn't have much saved, and the idea of returning home with my parents still at war was unbearable. So I told myself I could handle it. I'd lock the doors, keep the blinds drawn, and wait it out. But Angela didn't stop. If anything, she got bolder. One humid night, long after sunset, she showed up again. This time she wasn't screaming. Her voice was soft, almost pleading, when she pressed her face to the glass door and begged, "Let me in, please. You don't understand. I need to save you." Charlie barked until his throat went hoarse. I stood frozen in the hallway, the weight of her words pressing on me. Save me? From what? From whom? When she finally left, muttering to herself, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I crept into Thomas's study and pulled open drawers, something I hadn't dared to do before. That's when I found them. Letters, folded and stuffed deep into the back. Letters addressed to women I'd never heard of. Letters dripping with lines like, "You're nothing without me." My skin prickled as I stuffed them back where I found them. For the first time, I wondered if Angela wasn't the problem. By late July, I was counting the days until Thomas's return. I fantasized about handing him the keys, collecting my pay, and leaving that house behind. When the morning finally came, I packed my things neatly, even folded the sheets on the bed, eager to be done. He arrived in the evening, tall and sharply dressed despite the heat, his smile practiced but not warm. I expected gratitude. Instead, his eyes swept the house as though he'd left a trap and was checking whether it had been sprung. "Everything in order?" he asked casually, setting down his suitcase. "Yes," I said, trying to sound confident. "Were phone calls. I thought you should know." Though a woman, Angela, kept coming by. And there, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It." Then his eyes fixed on me and his tone shifted. "Did you?" Angela exaggerates. She likes to stir trouble. "I'll handle." "You didn't open any of my private drawers," the way he asked it, flat and direct, sent a chill through me. "No," I lied quickly. His stare lingered a moment too long before he finally handed me an envelope of cash. "Thank you," he said curtly, as though dismissing an employee. I left that night, more relieved than grateful. Weeks later, back in my tiny apartment, I ran into a mutual acquaintance who'd grown up in Savannah. We fell into small talk, and when I mentioned I'd house sat for Thomas Whitaker, her expression changed instantly. She lowered her voice and said, "You know about him, right?" I shook my head. "He had a patient, Angela. She filed a harassment complaint against him a while back. It got settled quietly, but people talk." The conversation stuck in my chest like a splinter. Suddenly, everything fit together. The warnings, the desperate knocking, the letters, his coldness when he came home. I realized then how close I'd been to believing his version of things, dismissing Angela as unstable like he wanted me to. Even now, years later, I can still hear Charlie's growl, that instinctive rumble every time she approached. Funny how the dog seemed to understand something I hadn't. He'd been my only shield in that house. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd let Angela inside. Or worse, if I'd trusted Thomas too much, let myself get drawn into his polished smile and practiced reassurances. Evil doesn't always come crashing through the door in the form of a stranger. Sometimes it wears a white coat, signs checks, and pretends to be respectable. The most dangerous influence is often the one that convinces you their chaos is none of your concern, until it becomes yours. Some people look back on their teenage years as a blur of freedom, driving late into the night with friends, football games, homecoming dances. My memories were different. By 19, my life was more responsibility than rebellion. My mom had walked out when I was 14, leaving behind a trail of arguments and unpaid bills. My dad tried to keep things afloat by working 12-hour night shifts at a manufacturing plant, but exhaustion made him a ghost in his own home. That left me, Amelia Carter, stuck in between roles. Too young to be anyone's mother, but too old to be anyone's carefree kid. My brother Ethan, 11, looked up at me with those wide gray eyes that always seemed to ask for answers I didn't have. I was taking classes at the community college and working part-time at an antique shop downtown. Between essays, closing shifts, and packing Ethan's lunch, life never felt still. October of 2011 was brutal. Rent was overdue, the furnace sputtered whenever the temperature dipped, and I could see the stress carving deeper lines into Dad's face. The only escape I had were my sketches. I'd sit at the kitchen table at night, Ethan asleep in the next room, and lose myself in pencil and paper. But even that was interrupted by dreams I couldn't shake. For 3 weeks straight, the same dream played out. A lonely road, Ridgeway Lane, ending in a house I'd never seen. White paint peeling, shutters broken, a single light burning in the upstairs window. And always a figure watching me from behind the glass. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. I'd wake up shivering, heart pounding, the image stuck behind my eyes like it had been burned there. I didn't know why it unnerved me so much. Dreams weren't real, right? But I carried it with me every day, like a warning that hadn't yet explained itself. At the shop where I worked, Mrs. Harlow noticed my distraction. She was in her 60s, sharp-tongued but kind, and she had a way of treating antiques as if they were living things. One Friday afternoon, just before Halloween, she handed me a wooden box wrapped in paper so brittle it crumbled at the edges. "Delivery for a collector," she said. "Outside town, Ridgeway Lane." The name hit me like a slap. My throat dried up, and for a second I thought maybe I'd misheard. "Where?" I asked. She repeated it. Ridgeway Lane. The coincidence made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh and asked, "What's in the box?" Her eyes flicked to mine. "Best you don't open it. Some items carry their own stories." I wanted to press, but her tone ended the conversation. She scribbled the address on a slip of paper, 132 Ridgeway Lane. My fingers shook when I tucked it into my pocket. That evening, Ethan begged to come with me. "I don't want to stay home alone, not on a Friday night," he said, eyes wide in that way that made me feel guilty. "Fine," I sighed, "but you stay in the car if it's weird." He grinned, and that was that. I told myself it was just another errand, just another house. But as the sun sank low and we turned down Ridgeway Lane, the sight of that house waiting at the end of the road made my stomach twist. It was the house from my dream, down to the last broken shutter, and the upstairs window glowed with a faint yellow light. By the time I parked, night had settled in full, pressing down with a kind of silence that felt heavier than it should. The houses along Ridgeway Lane sagged with age. Some had boards nailed across the windows. Others leaned as though a stiff wind might take them down. Only the last house, 132, stood with its faint, stubborn glow from upstairs. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, staring. "It looks haunted," he whispered. "Don't start," I muttered, trying to steady my voice. The porch creaked under our weight as we stepped up. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles touched the wood, the door eased open on its own. The air that spilled out was damp, sour, tinged with something metallic. Ethan pressed closer to me, his small hand gripping my arm. Inside, the hallway was dim. A table stood just beyond the doorway, its surface thick with dust except for one clean rectangle where something had been placed and removed many times. "Leave it on the table," a woman's voice called. It was faint, coming from somewhere deeper inside. The tone was flat, almost rehearsed, like she'd said those words 100 times before. My skin prickled. I set the wooden box on the table, trying not to breathe too deeply, said loudly, "It's here." "All right." Silence followed. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. Then came the sound. Footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth directly above us. Ethan's grip tightened. "Mia," he whispered, his voice thin. "We should go." I stared at the staircase, waiting for someone to appear. No one did. My pulse drummed in my ears. The voice came again. "Don't go upstairs." This time it was closer. Too close, right behind me. I spun, but no one stood there. Just the open doorway, the dark beyond. Ethan whimpered, tugging me toward the exit, but something in me fought back. Curiosity, recklessness, call it what you want, told Ethan, forcing calm into my voice. "By the door. Don't move. Stay here. Two climbed halfway up the stairs, each creak echoing like a gunshot. The air grew colder with every step, and at the landing I saw it. A tall figure stood in the hallway, shadowy, motionless, its head tilted as though studying me. "Who are you?" I whispered. It didn't answer, didn't move. Then the woman's voice, right at my ear, though no one was near me, said again, "Not to go upstairs." I told you. I spun around. Nothing. When I turned back, the figure was gone. The upstairs light flickered out, plunging everything into darkness. I didn't think. I bolted down the stairs, grabbed Ethan's hand, and we ran. As we stumbled off the porch, I dared one last look back. The upstairs window glowed again. The shadow figure stood pressed against the glass, watching us leave. We didn't speak the entire drive home. Ethan sat curled in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around himself, eyes glued to the road. My own hands shook on the steering wheel, but I kept them steady enough to get us home. When I pulled into the driveway, I popped the trunk, slid the wooden box inside, and slammed it shut like I was sealing away the night. I told myself I'd take it back to Mrs. Harlow first thing in the morning. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every sound in the house set my nerves on edge. The radiator clanking, the wind against the windows. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion dragged me under. When I woke, the first thing I did was check the trunk. It was empty. The box was gone. I ransacked the car, tore through the back seat, even checked the grass around the driveway. Nothing. At the shop, I confronted Mrs. Harlow. "Where's the box?" I demanded. She blinked at me, genuinely confused. "What box?" "The one you gave me yesterday, for Ridgeway Lane." Her face tightened, puzzled but firm. "Amelia, I never sent you to Ridgeway Lane. We don't deliver to places like that, and I don't own a box like the one you're describing." I stared at her, words stuck in my throat. You wrote down the address? You told me." She shook her head. "I think you need some rest." I left in a fog, her words rattling in my skull. If she hadn't sent me, who had? And how had the box vanished? That night the dream returned. The same house, the same window, the figure. But this time, when I turned away in the dream, I heard footsteps following me. The weeks after felt heavier. Ethan jumped at small noises, and I pretended I didn't feel the same. Sometimes late at night I'd swear I heard footsteps in our own house. Slow, deliberate, pacing upstairs while we sat below. One evening, I caught Ethan staring at the ceiling. "Do you hear it too?" I asked softly. He nodded without looking at me. "It's the same steps from the other house." I wanted to tell him it wasn't real, that it was just fear crawling into our heads. But I couldn't bring myself to lie. By mid-November, I stopped sketching. Every time I put pencil to paper, my hand drew that house, the window, the figure, over and over again. It was like the image lived in me now, refusing to leave. Years passed. I moved out of my father's house, got my own apartment, tried to build a life. Ethan grew older, but even now, each October he calls me. His voice lower now, but still carrying that same boyish unease. "I had the dream again," he'll say. And I'll admit I do too. The house on Ridgeway Lane hasn't faded from me. Every fall, when the leaves curl and the air smells of wood smoke, I'll find myself staring at my upstairs window, half expecting to see that figure standing there. Sometimes in the quietest hours of the night I'll hear footsteps overhead, and in those moments I wonder if the box really vanished, or if it never left me at all. Some doors once opened never close again. Curiosity can carry us into places we're not meant to go, and what waits there may follow long after we've left. The house on Ridgeway Lane taught me that the scariest hauntings aren't in abandoned houses. They're in the weight we carry with us, the echoes that live in our minds, and the choices that refuse to let us go. I used to think moving to Las Vegas was a kind of restart button. I was 27, freshly burned out from freelancing in Los Angeles, and I wanted somewhere cheaper, somewhere alive, but not as crushing as LA had been. Downtown Vegas seemed like the answer. Fremont Street was noisy, colorful, and chaotic, but it carried an energy I liked. The lights at night made the cracked sidewalks glow, and the mix of tourists, locals, and drifters gave the city this odd heartbeat that kept me going when work felt stale. When Lucas and I found the loft, it felt like a miracle. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom with exposed brick, high ceilings, and creaky wooden floors. Rent was steep, but with our friends Leah and Travis splitting the bill, it was doable. They'd been our people for years, the kind of friends you didn't have to clean up for, the kind you could argue with and still end up on the couch together with takeout 10 minutes later. But life doesn't wait for comfort. Leah landed a job in Phoenix, something she couldn't turn down, and Travis, predictably, followed her. That left Lucas and me staring at the reality we couldn't afford to avoid. We couldn't cover the place on our own, not without taking second jobs, and neither of us wanted to give it up. The loft had already started to feel like ours. So we turned to the modern-day lottery. Craigslist. I spent nights scrolling through endless messages, college kids looking for cheap rooms, older guys looking for something more than roommates, couples wanting temporary spots while they figured things out. Every interview felt like speed dating with higher stakes. Some people seemed too polished, others way too strange. Lucas and I would debrief at the diner afterward, whispering, "Could you live with them?" Most of the time the answer was no. Then came Kayla and Eric. We met them at a diner on Charleston Boulevard. Kayla was a fire hose of words. She told us within 10 minutes about her failed acting career, her amazing skincare side hustle, and her dream of starting a podcast. Her laugh was loud enough to turn heads. Eric, on the other hand, barely spoke. He sat across from me, pushing fries around his plate, and when he did look up, his eyes locked on mine with a kind of intensity that wasn't friendly. Afterward, Lucas nudged me. "They seem fine, babe. At least they have jobs." I wasn't convinced. Something about Eric made me want to get up and leave. But the rent deadline loomed, and practicality won over instinct. A week later, we handed Kayla and Eric the keys. For a while, it seemed fine. Kayla filled the apartment with scented candles, her voice echoing off the brick walls as she narrated her day. Eric disappeared often, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. It was unsettling but manageable. We told ourselves this was just the adjustment period, that roommates were never perfect. But soon, I started to notice the little things. The remote never where we left it. Dishes piling in the sink though Lucas and I hadn't cooked. And late at night when I'd get up for water, I'd hear Eric in the living room on the phone, his voice low, muttering things that made my stomach knot. One night I froze in the hallway when I heard him laugh quietly and say, "The balcony door. Easy. They don't even lock." He never knew I was listening. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down I felt the ground shift beneath me. At first, Lucas told me I was overreacting. People say weird stuff on the phone. He shrugged. Maybe he was joking. But the longer they stayed, the harder it was to ignore. Kayla treated the loft like a stage. She'd invite friends over without asking, blast music in the middle of the afternoon, and leave half-burnt candles scattered across the living room. More than once I came home to the smell of smoke because she'd fallen asleep with one lit. Eric was a different story. His silence wasn't shy, it was calculated. When he did speak, his words carried a mocking edge, like he enjoyed watching people squirm. Once, after I mentioned how late their friends stayed, he leaned close, his breath sour with beer, and whispered, "Relax, man. We're family now. You should loosen up." It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, like a warning wrapped in a joke. Then the parties started. Not ours, theirs. We'd come home on a Friday night to find strangers spilling out onto the balcony, bottles clinking, the carpet sticky with beer. Eric thrived in it, roaming the room like he owned the place. Kayla laughed too loud, telling stories to people whose names I never caught. Lucas and I would retreat to our bedroom fuming, listening to the music thump through the wall. We argued constantly. Lucas wanted to confront them. I wanted to avoid the fight. But avoidance only worked until things started disappearing. First it was small, a set of vinyl records I'd been collecting since high school. I tore apart the living room looking for them, only to have Kayla shrug and say, "Maybe you misplaced them?" Lucas's headphones vanished next. He searched every drawer, every backpack, gone. Then came the final straw, my gaming console. I knew exactly where I'd left it, hooked up to the TV. One morning it was gone. Eric blamed random party guests, claiming someone must have walked off with it. His voice was calm, almost amused, like the theft was our fault for not watching our stuff. But I knew. One afternoon, heading down to the garage to swap laundry, I passed by Eric's beat-up silver Honda Civic. Something in me told me to look, and there they were, sitting in the back seat, my console, Lucas's headphones, stacked carelessly like junk. I snapped photos immediately, my hands trembling. That night, Lucas and I fought again. He wanted to confront Eric outright. I wanted to call the police. Both options felt dangerous. Eric wasn't the kind of guy you wanted cornered. We decided to wait until morning. I barely slept, listening for footsteps in the hallway, expecting Eric to barge in at any moment. At sunrise, I drove straight to the police station with the photos. The officer nodded politely, wrote down my statement, and promised to send someone by. I felt lighter as I left, like I'd finally taken control. But when the police came, Eric was gone. His clothes, his laptop, even the old Civic, vanished overnight. Kayla stood in the living room with wide eyes, playing dumb. "I don't know where he is," she insisted, her voice a mix of fear and performance. "We got into a fight. Maybe he left town." The police weren't convinced, but without him there, their hands were tied. They gave us a case number and left. Lucas and I didn't hesitate. We changed the locks that afternoon. We boxed up whatever Kayla and Eric had left behind and set it by the curb. Kayla cried, begged to stay, claimed she had nowhere to go. But my patience was gone. I told her she had 24 hours to leave. She left that night. For a while, it felt like we'd won. The loft was quiet again, ours again. But the peace was short-lived. It started 2 weeks later. I was taking out the trash when I saw it parked across the street. An old silver Honda Civic. The same dent on the rear bumper, the same faded paint. The windows were tinted, but I swear I saw him, Eric, leaning back in the driver's seat, watching. I froze, trash bag dangling from my hand, until a horn blared behind me, and the car drove off. When I told Lucas, he shook his head. "He's not coming back." "You're letting him live in your head. He's gone, Daniel," but I knew what I saw, and it wasn't just once. Some nights I'd look out the balcony and see headlights lingering at the curb. Not every night, not long enough to prove, but enough to feel hunted. I stopped sleeping well. Every creak of the loft made me flinch. I double-checked locks 3, 4 times. Lucas tried to be supportive, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Living with Eric had damaged more than just our home. It had driven a wedge between us. One night I stood by the window at 2 a.m, staring at the street. The car wasn't there, but I still felt the weight of eyes on me. Months passed. The Civic stopped showing up. Or maybe I stopped looking. Lucas and I tried to rebuild our routine, but the loft never felt the same. Every shadow felt suspect. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Eventually, we moved. Not far, just to another apartment across town. Smaller, safer, less history. I told myself we were starting fresh again, but the truth lingered. The fear never completely left me. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself scanning parking lots for that silver Civic. I wonder where Eric went, if he found someone else to leech onto, to intimidate, to steal from. I wonder if he ever thinks about us. But mostly, I think about how easy it was to let him in. How desperation made us lower the walls we should have kept standing. The scariest part wasn't what he took from us. It was how quickly a stranger slipped into our lives, how easily we ignored the warning signs. The loft on Fremont Street taught me something I'll never forget. Desperation can blur our judgment, and when we ignore our instincts, we often invite danger closer than we realize. Protecting your space, your home, your peace, your boundaries, means listening to the small voice that warns you when something feels wrong. Because once you let the wrong person in, it's far harder to get them out. I used to think boredom was the worst enemy a person could have. Growing up in Linton Hollow, Arkansas, I knew boredom like the back of my hand. The town was small enough that everyone knew the sound of everyone else's truck, small enough that any excitement got passed around and burned out in less than a week. My dad always said Linton Hollow was the kind of place people got stuck in, not the kind they dreamed about. I figured he was right, but when you're 19 and don't know anything else, stuck is just life. Our house sat right off the highway. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, chipped paint, a roof that groaned every time the wind shifted. Dad worked construction when he could find jobs, and when he couldn't, he'd park himself in his recliner with a cigarette in one hand and a beer in the other, eyes glued to whatever game was playing. Since Mom left years before, we didn't talk much. Silence was easier than opening wounds we couldn't close. The only thing that broke that silence for me was Zeke Harper. Zeke and I had been inseparable since middle school. We were the kind of kids who built forts out in the pine woods and rode our bikes until the tires were bare. Zeke had a spark I didn't. Reckless. Restless. He hated this town more than anyone I'd ever met, but instead of leaving, he kept trying to set fire to its monotony with pranks, dares, and trouble. His mom barely noticed. His dad was long gone, and Zeke lived in a sagging trailer 3 blocks from me. By 2011, we were on different tracks. I was clawing my way through community college classes, hoping they might lead somewhere. Zeke had already dropped out. He worked odd jobs at the gas station and spent nights smoking behind the dumpster or driving his beat-up Chevy down back roads with no destination. He liked to talk about bigger things, bigger places, bigger lives. But I think we both knew he didn't have a plan. One chilly October night, we were sitting on the hood of his Chevy outside the Dollar General, the hum of the neon sign buzzing above us. He lit a cigarette, took a drag, and grinned. "You ever think about how dead this place is?" he asked. "All the time," I said. He leaned back, smoke curling around his head, something big, like Bigfoot. "What if we gave him something to talk about?" I laughed. "Bigfoot? Seriously?" "Yeah, man, think about it. People here want to believe in something. Ghosts, monsters, whatever. You give them a glimpse, they'll eat it up." I thought he was joking, but a week later he showed up at my house holding a plastic bag with a mangy-looking Bigfoot costume inside. The mask was rubber, the fur was patchy, but at night it didn't look half bad. The first time we tried it, I drove down Miller Creek Road while Zeke sprinted across the headlights. For a second I almost believed it myself. Within days, blurry photos popped up on Facebook. Folks were buzzing. Saw something strange near Miller Creek. Some thought it was funny, others swore it was real. Zeke soaked up every comment like it was gasoline on a fire. At first I laughed with him. It felt harmless. Then the dog started turning up dead. Not just dead, mutilated. Torn open in ways no coyote could have managed. It was all over the local news. Parents kept their kids inside after dark. Suddenly, Bigfoot wasn't just a joke anymore. Zeke came to me pale and shaking. "I saw it," he said. "Saw what?" "Someone else. Same suit. Out there. It wasn't me, and it wasn't you." I wanted to tell him he was imagining things, but the fear in his eyes made me swallow the words. That was when the fun stopped, and something darker took its place. Zeke had always been a little wild, but after that night, something in him shifted. He stopped joking about Bigfoot, stopped bragging about fooling the town. Instead, he jumped at every sound, his eyes darting to the tree line like something was waiting for him there. One evening, I walked to his trailer and found him crouched on the porch, setting down a bag of raw meat. The smell hit me before I even spoke. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. He startled, then looked up, his face pale. "Keeping it away." "Keeping what away? Strays?" He shook his head. "No, you know what I mean." I stared at the buzzing flies around the bag. Coyotes. You're losing it, man. There's nothing out there, but Zeke's voice cracked. I saw it again. Taller than me, wearing the same damn fur. But the face, it wasn't right. It wasn't human. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I left him there on that porch muttering to himself, shadows shifting behind his hollow eyes. That night my phone rang at 2 a.m. I answered groggily, and Zeke's voice came through ragged. "They're watching me," he whispered. "Who?" Silence. Then, "You'll see." 3 days later, his trailer caught fire. The firefighters called it a space heater accident. Folks nodded and moved on. But when I visited him at the hospital, his arms wrapped in gauze, he grabbed my wrist with a burned hand and hissed, "It wasn't an accident. It's out there, and it looks just like me." I left shaken, the words gnawing at me. That same week, my house was broken into. Nothing stolen. Drawers dumped, clothes scattered, cupboards opened. The sheriff said it was kids messing around. Dad shrugged it off. But I knew. I could feel the wrongness like a draft slipping through the cracks. A month later, I woke to creaking floorboards at 2 a.m. At first, I thought it was Dad getting water, but when I opened my door, I froze. A tall, hunched figure stood in the hallway, hairy, breathing heavy. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. For a second, I thought it was the costume. Then it tilted its head in a disturbingly human way. "Zeke," I whispered, trembling. It didn't answer. It just backed into the shadows, step by jerky step until it was gone. By the time I turned on every light in the house, there was nothing. No footprints, no sign of a break-in, just the faint smell of smoke like burned wood. After that night, I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind outside, I heard it. I tried telling Dad, but he just grunted and told me to lay off the scary movies. I couldn't tell him that I hadn't watched a scary movie in months, that I was living one. I drove to the hospital to see Zeke again. He was half asleep, his bandaged arms twitching against the sheets. When I said his name, his eyes shot open, wide and desperate. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he rasped. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "It wants us. It's not just playing anymore." "What do you mean?" I whispered. "It knows your face now. Don't feed it. Don't talk to it. Don't even look at it if you can help it." His uncle came 2 days later and moved him to Missouri. He didn't say goodbye in person. Just left me a note. "Don't look for it. It knows your face now." For weeks after, the town went quiet. No new dog killings, no strange sightings on Facebook. People chalked it up to hysteria. But at night, driving home, I'd catch a shadow lurching in the trees. Too tall to be a deer, too slow to be a hunter. Once I thought I saw its eyes in the ditch glowing like embers. Life tried to move on. Classes piled up. Dad grumbled about bills. Folks went back to fishing and gossiping and mowing their patchy yards. But the silence in the woods pressed harder than ever. One evening, heading home from campus, I found my front door wide open. Dad wasn't home yet. Inside, everything looked the same, except my room. Drawers dumped, sheets pulled off, closet door hanging open. Nothing missing, just like last time. I sat on the porch steps until Dad pulled up. When he asked what was wrong, I just shook my head. I couldn't explain something he'd never believe. Nights blurred together. Sometimes I'd wake to tapping on the window, soft but insistent. Other times I'd hear heavy breathing in the hallway. Always, there was the faint smell of smoke. I thought about running. But where would I go? Zeke had run, and it still haunted him. His words rang in my head. Don't feed it. Don't look for it. One night I drove aimlessly, ending up at Miller Creek. I parked and stared at the water, moonlight breaking across it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. When I turned, the woods were empty. Years have passed since then, but I never really left Linton Hollow. Dad got older, the house sagged further, and I stayed. People sometimes ask why. Truth is, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm waiting. Maybe I'm too scared to leave. Sometimes, late at night, I see shapes in the tree line when I drive home. Lurching, hunched, familiar. Sometimes I hear breathing just outside my window. Zeke never came back. I heard he moved again, farther north. I never called, never wrote. What would I say? That I still see it? That it still knows me? There are nights I sit on the porch and wonder if Zeke was the bad influence for starting it all, or if he was the only one who truly understood what we let in. Because whatever it is, it's still here, and it's still watching. Sometimes we think boredom is harmless, that chasing thrills or playing pranks will fill the emptiness of small-town life. But some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. Fear, once invited, doesn't leave. The lesson I carry from Linton Hollow is simple. Some stories aren't meant to be written by us, and some shadows are better left alone. When I think back to the fall of 2014, I don't remember the crisp air or the changing leaves or even the excitement of being 20 and in college. What I remember most is the apartment on Logan Street and the way it felt like both freedom and prison at the same time. Money was always tight for me. My parents lived in Nebraska, and though they helped when they couldn't cover the kind of rent Denver demanded. So I took what I could get, a 3-bedroom on the corner of Logan, a block away from a laundromat that smelled like bleach and a dive bar that blasted music until 2 in the morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap. And at 20, cheap felt like the only thing that mattered. I didn't move in alone. Emma and Lauren came with the place, already living there when I signed on. Emma was unforgettable from the start. Loud, quick to laugh, the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly know everyone's name by the time she left. She majored in communications but spent more time organizing beer pong brackets than attending lectures. She had that quality of being effortlessly liked, even when she didn't deserve it. Lauren, on the other hand, was quiet to the point of disappearing. She was neat, careful, always hunched over her biology textbooks at the kitchen table. She wore sweaters in every season and apologized too much, like existing was an inconvenience. I found myself somewhere between them, just trying to keep up with classes, work my shifts at the bookstore, and hold on to some sense of balance. At first, the apartment was fine. The radiator hissed like it had lungs. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast no matter what we cooked, and the floors creaked enough to sound like footsteps at night. But it was ours, and that felt like something. Emma kept the place lively with friends and laughter. Lauren kept it orderly, and I kept reminding myself that this was temporary, that the stress and smallness were worth it for the independence. But cracks started showing quickly. Emma loved having people over. At first it was fun, friends laughing on the balcony, music spilling into the hall, late-night talks around the kitchen table. Then the parties grew, and strangers began crashing on our couch, leaving cigarette butts everywhere, drinking our milk straight from the carton. One night, after finding a guy I'd never met asleep in the hallway outside my room, I confronted Emma. "Hey, can you at least give us a heads up? I've got an exam tomorrow." She rolled her eyes and smiled that careless smile. "You're older." "Relax, it's college. You'll miss this when..." But I wasn't so sure. Lauren, meanwhile, avoided saying anything directly to Emma, but I noticed her locking her door at night. Once, while we were both brushing our teeth, she leaned close and whispered, "Swear I woke up and someone was standing in my doorway. I thought it was you." It wasn't me, I told her, my stomach twisting. When we brought it up to Emma, she laughed it off. "You've been studying too much, get some sleep." That was Emma's way, never serious, always a joke. But the more she laughed, the more uneasy I felt. The first real cracks weren't about noise or parties, they were about money. We'd agreed to split rent and utilities evenly, but Emma had a habit of forgetting. When I brought it up, she leaned against the counter with a smirk. "You make more at your job than I do, right? What's $20? "It's not about the money," I said, heat rising in my face. Then what is it about? You being uptight again? She winked like it was a joke, but I could see in her eyes that she meant every word. Lauren and I ended up covering her share more often than not. She always promised to get us back, but she never did. And slowly it stopped feeling like she was just careless. It felt intentional. Then came Chase. I first met him when I came home from work one night and found him sitting in our kitchen, feet up on the table, beer in hand. He was older, mid-30s maybe, greasy hair slicked back, a smug smile that didn't fade even when he looked me over like I was a bug under glass. "Who's this?" he asked Emma, jerking his thumb toward me. "My roommate," Emma said with a shrug as if I wasn't standing right there. From that night on, he was around constantly. At first, just now and then every other night, then almost every night. He didn't live there, but it started to feel like he did. I didn't like the way he looked at us, me and especially Lauren. His eyes lingered too long, his grin too wide. Once I caught him in the hallway staring at Lauren's closed door like he was debating whether to knock. One night I woke up to glass shattering. I rushed out to find Chase standing over a broken lamp, Emma laughing at his side. "You can't just trash the place," I snapped. "We live here too." Emma's smile vanished. "Don't talk to him like that. He's family to me." Family. The word hung in the air like smoke. From that moment on, she sided with him against us. Lauren stopped spending time in the common areas. I followed her lead. The apartment no longer felt like ours. It felt like his. By late October, the tension in the apartment was unbearable. Emma mocked Lauren for being paranoid, teased me for being uptight, and whispered to Chase when they thought we couldn't hear. One night, Lauren and I sat on the fire escape outside my bedroom window, wrapped in blankets against the chill. She whispered, "She's not the same Emma we met." "I know," I said. "She scares me now." I didn't say it out loud, but I agreed. It wasn't just her. The whole apartment felt off, like it had soaked up their hostility and turned against us. The smell of burnt toast was stronger. The radiator hissed louder. The creaks in the floors felt heavier, like footsteps we couldn't see. Then came the night we realized we weren't just dealing with carelessness anymore. We were dealing with something darker. I came home from work to find my bedroom door wide open. Drawers rifled through, notebooks scattered, my journal tossed onto the bed like someone had been reading it. Lauren's room looked the same. Emma and Chase were in the kitchen, drinking and laughing. "Did you go through our stuff?" I demanded. Chase leaned back, smirking. "If you've got nothing to hide, why does it matter?" Emma laughed. "God, you're so dramatic. We were just looking for a lighter." I stood there shaking, rage boiling in me. Lauren appeared in the hallway, her face pale. She didn't say a word, just grabbed my arm and pulled me into my room. We locked the door behind us. That night, she whispered, "I can't stay here anymore." "Neither can I," said, already packing a bag. We moved out the next morning. No dramatic fight, no screaming match. Just two girls with backpacks and duffel bags, slipping out while Emma and Chase were passed out on the couch. We found a small sublet across town just for the rest of the semester. It was cramped, the radiator didn't work, and the neighbors upstairs stomped around like elephants. But it felt safe, and safe was worth everything. Emma didn't call. She didn't text. For a while I expected some message, some confrontation, but there was nothing. A month later, I heard from a mutual friend that Emma had dropped out of school. She'd moved in with Chase full-time. No one saw her much after that. She stopped showing up at parties, stopped answering texts. It was like she'd disappeared. Lauren tried to talk about it sometimes. "Do you think she regrets it?" she'd ask. I never knew what to say, because I wasn't sure the Emma we knew was even still there to regret anything. It's been years now. But I still think about that apartment. I still remember the creaking floors, the hiss of the radiator, the constant smell of burnt toast. But mostly, I remember the way Emma's laughter shifted, how it went from infectious to cruel, from a sound that made you feel included to one that made you feel small. Sometimes I wonder if Emma was always that way, if Chase just brought it out of her, or if she became someone else entirely. I don't know which possibility scares me more. Lauren and I stayed friends, but even now, we don't like talking about Logan Street. When we do, it's in hushed tones, like speaking about it too loudly might make it real again. College is supposed to be about finding yourself. For me, it was also about learning who I needed to stay away from. And Emma, well, she taught me that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who can turn into strangers overnight. The apartment on Logan Street taught me that bad influences don't always come from obvious enemies. Sometimes they come from the people we laugh with, live with, and trust. The danger isn't always in recognizing who they are, it's in realizing too late how far you've let them in. I grew up in Rochester, New York, in a neighborhood that wasn't flashy, but it had its small charms. Maple trees lining the sidewalks, neighbors who waved as you walked by, and the occasional snowstorm that made the world feel magical for a few days. I was always the quiet kid, more interested in sketching and photography than sports, though I tried both in middle school just to fit in. My dad had lost his job at a factory 2 years earlier, and since then, I'd been doing what I could to help with bills, shoveling snow, babysitting, and eventually working part-time at Maple Brew, a small coffee shop near the edge of the strip mall. Photography became my escape. My camera wasn't just a tool, it was a shield, a lens through which I could observe the world without being fully in it. I carried it everywhere, to class, on walks, even to the coffee shop. I liked capturing things people ignored, the way light hit a puddle, the quiet moments between strangers on a bus, the frost on the edge of a car windshield. It gave me a sense of control in a world that sometimes felt too big. It was a Friday night in early December 2018 when I first noticed him. The first snow of the season had started falling, a thin, wet layer of slush forming over the roads and sidewalks. I had just finished my shift at Maple Brew, closing up the shop around 10:30 p.m. Most of the regulars had left hours earlier, leaving just one man sitting in the corner with a leather notebook. He hadn't ordered anything in hours, yet he occasionally looked up at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. Something about him was off, but I brushed it off as imagination. Jenna, my co-worker, offered to wait with me for my Uber. She was kind like that, always looking out for others despite having her own worries. Her younger brother was sick, and she juggled extra hours at a nearby pharmacy. I insisted I'd be fine and didn't want to bother her, a decision I regretted the moment I stepped outside. The snow made everything quieter, muffled, almost dreamlike. But in that dream, there was him. I first saw him standing by the lamppost at the far end of the parking lot. He wasn't moving, just there, watching. My mind raced. Maybe he's waiting for a ride, maybe smoking. But he wasn't smoking, and his face was obscured by a hood. Every step I took, he seemed to adjust, subtly, angled to face me. My Uber app said 3 minutes away. 3 minutes stretched like 3 hours. When he spoke, I nearly jumped. "Cold night, isn't it?" His voice was calm, too calm, and it came from behind me. I hadn't heard him move, but suddenly, he was closer than I expected, 10 feet away, just enough to feel the weight of him. I forced a polite smile, my voice trembling. "Yeah, it is." "Working late?" he asked, casual, almost teasing. I lied. Just grabbing something quick, not working. My heart thumped against my ribs. He chuckled softly like he knew something I didn't. Around this time most nights. "I've seen you before, though." You close up, I realized then that he had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. And in that moment, I understood I wasn't just uncomfortable, I was in danger. For the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Every time I left Maple Brew or walked home from class, I scanned the streets, looking for shadows, strangers, anything that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was paranoia, an overreaction fueled by too many late nights and cold walks alone. But when I told Jenna, she nodded slightly. "I've noticed him too. she said quietly one afternoon while we cleaned the counter. The gray hoodie. He doesn't order anything and just sits there sometimes. The guy in my stomach dropped. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. I tried to adjust my routine. I started leaving the shop with coworkers, walking in groups, taking different streets. But he adapted too. Weeks later, I saw the same figure across the street, half hidden under the flickering streetlights, always watching, never approaching. One night, I stayed behind at the shop to take inventory. It was almost midnight. I had headphones on, music drowning out the soft hum of the neon sign. When I finally locked the door, I froze. There he was again, standing by the lamppost, hands in his pockets, hood low. My legs felt like lead as I walked across the lot. "You shouldn't trust every driver either," he said when I approached my Uber, which had just pulled up. I didn't look back, sliding into the car, hands trembling. The older driver asked if I was okay. I nodded, saying nothing. How could I explain someone was stalking me without sounding insane? That night I barely slept. My dreams were fragmented. Streetlights, hooded figures, snow falling too fast, and my own footsteps echoing in an empty parking lot. I woke up drenched in sweat, the camera on my nightstand a cold weight against my skin. I started documenting everything, not just for my own safety, but for proof. Notes, sketches, even pictures of the lot and the lamppost. I became hyper-aware of patterns. He always appeared on Fridays, always around 10:30, always at the same spot. He seemed to know when I would be alone, when I was vulnerable. One Friday, I arrived early to close the shop. I hid near the door, camera ready. Sure enough, 10 minutes before closing, he appeared. Not moving, just observing like a predator waiting for the right moment. My fingers shook as I took a few discreet pictures. He noticed and turned his head slightly. For the first time, I saw his eyes. Cold, calculating, not humanely curious, but watching. I considered calling the police, I really did. But what would I tell them? A stranger standing, watching? It sounded ridiculous. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd have to protect myself alone. I bought a small pepper spray keychain, carried it at all times, practiced slingshot motion in my room. I walked differently, stayed in well-lit areas, and avoided distractions. Even the snow, once magical, now felt like a hazard, masking movement, making shadows deeper. Weeks passed. He didn't escalate. No approach, no threats. But the psychological toll was heavy. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't sleep without checking the windows. My friends noticed my nervousness. "It's just one guy," Jenna said. "Maybe he's harmless." But something in his presence told me otherwise. One night, I stayed at Maple Brew after closing again. I left the back door unlocked just to make a quick exit if needed. He appeared again, but this time, closer than ever, just 20 feet away. I held my camera in front of me like a weapon. "You see the world differently," he said softly, studying me. "You notice things others miss." "Yes," I said, voice shaking. "And I notice you following me. Leave me alone." He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "We'll see." And then he disappeared, melting into the night. That was the last time I saw him in person, but the fear lingered. Every dark corner, every streetlight, every lamppost reminded me of him. I changed my routine, avoided the lot for months, and started leaving class later, taking cabs home instead of walking. Months later, the snow melted, and the city returned to its usual rhythm. I never saw the man again at Maple Brew or across the street. But the paranoia never fully left. I carried my camera everywhere, not just for art anymore, but as a shield, as a comfort. The stranger taught me lessons I didn't want but needed. Awareness, self-preservation, and trust in intuition. I realized that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits, silent, patient, watching. And the best defense isn't confrontation, it's vigilance, preparation, and the courage to leave when necessary. Even now, walking through empty lots or dim streets, I remember him. The gray hoodie, the stillness, the way he made me feel like my every step was known. And I know that while he's gone, the lesson remains. You never really know who's watching, so you must always watch yourself. The stranger in the parking lot taught me that safety is not a given, and awareness is a skill you must cultivate. Trust your instincts, take precautions, and never dismiss the feeling that someone may be watching. The world can seem safe, but vigilance and preparation are the only shields against unseen threats.